That event should be converted to winter storm warning. It means a lot of snow. It means we're all affected. Now, of course, I look at different computer models for guidance. One of the fairly reliable ones that I look at in general is indicating about 20 inches of snow in Boston and Worcester. But there's another one that I look at as well. It's almost the same story. Notice the difference is the South Coast and the Cape. Some have a lot, some don't, because that's right where the mix is going to be, very close to that area for the middle part of the storm. But even if that happens, the latter part of the storm, it'll be blitzing snow down there. So you might make up the difference anyway. And finally, one more that I sometimes look at is even showing more snow. But I wouldn't consider this as reliable as the other two. But of course, I also use my own experience. And to me, this looks like a classic setup for heavy snowstorm, major nor'easter in southern New England. I think the potential is there for most of us for 1 to 2 feet of snow. Wild card, as it often is on Cape Cod, because of some mixing for part of the storm. But there will be heavy snow, perhaps early and especially late in the storm down there. You need cold air. It's going to come down out of eastern Canada. You need moisture. It's going to flow out of the Gulf of Mexico, come up the coast. I'll have a complete timeline on how this is going to play in, which obviously it is, to the upcoming weekend in just a couple of minutes. Ed?
And right now, utility companies are working hard to stay ahead of the storm and keep your power on. News Center 5's Sean Kelly tonight, live outside National Grid's Command Center. Sean?
And they have the technology to figure out where these major power outages are as they happen. But in addition to the snow, I should mention, all the snow that Harvey was talking about, it's really going to slow the process of getting to those power outages. And then there's the wind. It's going to bring down limbs far bigger than this. And so getting to those power outages is going to be a problem. But as the wind goes, they think there are a lot of trees that are going to come down as well.
When limbs snap and trees topple, this is the room where National Grid workers first spot the problem.
If a line was to go out, they would see it here.
It's the Transmission Control Center, which will likely be a very busy place starting Friday. They monitor National Grid's high voltage lines all over New England here.
What happens is those sensors or the systems themselves and applications will pinpoint where the problem is, not necessarily to the exact pole, but in some cases it can.
Locating a problem and responding to it are two very different parts of the restoration process. National Grid and other power companies were sharply criticized and fined millions of dollars for their response to the Halloween nor'easter in 2011. One of the company's most important changes since then is not with technology.
Community liaisons was a big improvement that we put in place since last year.
Someone to contact the distribution center to shut off live wires.
It's all about information and providing the right information and accurate information during a storm.
Now, the power companies have been preparing for this weather event for the last several days. They have already been in touch with contractors around the country to make sure that they begin the staging process now in some of the areas that they think will be the hardest hit. We're live in Worcester County. Sean Kelly, WCVB News Center 5.
And residents on Plum Island will watch the storm surge very closely after being battered by several recent storms. 4 homes damaged by Hurricane Sandy remain a concern today. Still, no work is expected to shore up the dunes as the storm moves in. It is mostly watch and wait. And our coverage now continues with Storm Team 5's Mike Wonka. Mike, things could get pretty rough on the coast from the sounds of things.
I really do. And actually, it's getting worse as we start to look at more and more of the computer model runs that are coming in. We have a coastal flood watch, which goes all the way until Saturday at 1 o'clock. We're concerned about 2 high tides that are going to be taking place. The first one of those is going to be Friday night. This is going to be happening about 9:44 at night. We're looking at a normal tide of 10 feet, but we're going to start adding surge and wind to it. The second tide on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Now, this is a much higher tide. We were initially thinking the wind would go to the northwest. It may only go to the north, which means this is actually going to turn out to be a more dangerous tide than what we were initially thinking. Seas offshore, 25 to 30 feet. The surge on Friday, adding to this 10 foot, is going to be 3 feet. So you see a 13-foot tide is what we're talking about there. And on Saturday, even though the wind will shift a little bit, it's still a 2 to 3 foot surge that we're talking about there. So what do the winds look like? Well, they're not too bad until we get to Friday night. Then you start to see how they really start to build in here. Friday night at midnight, look at that. These are near hurricane-strength winds that we're talking about, and these winds stay strong all the way through the night into the Saturday morning high tide. So we're very concerned about those areas. Perhaps the area we're most concerned right now is in Scituate, where we're looking anywhere between minor to moderate, perhaps even to some major flooding taking place in that area. Ed?
And when you use the word blizzard, obviously, you think of this, the blizzard of '78. Today marks the 35th anniversary of the storm. What a nightmare. Cars stranded on the highway, massive flooding. The question tonight is, could it happen again? Let's get to News Center 5's Jack Harper. He's live along 128 in Newton, Jack, and as I remember back then, that was quite a mess back then.
One of the areas that was totally paralyzed there, those of us who saw it will never forget it. Everything behind us was frozen, literally, just paralyzed. But you got to remember one thing. Even the snow they're talking about now, back then we had roughly 42 inches of snow. My friend, the juice bottle here, right around there, in this area. Some up to 50 inches of snow, some of the valleys. And so that's a lot more than we're talking about now. And also, the biggest reason they say it shouldn't happen again is the experts feel we have learned a lot since then.
We're better prepared because there's been a lot of research, a lot of science went into developing newer techniques.
Better weapons from the trucks to the chemicals they spread. Crews feel confident.
We could probably handle an inch to an inch an hour.
Right here, they're predicting, let's say, 18 inches of snow. That's about 18 right there. Now, put it in perspective to Boston in 1978 was up here, 27 inches officially in Boston. But most of the area, including here in Canton, got closer to 45 to 48, some places 54. People did try to beat the storm home that day, but the forecast in the morning had been for just 6 inches or so. They kept upping the forecast, the accumulation totals, through the afternoon. By the time people got out here on the road, there was no place to go. They hit a wall on 128 and other roads.
I think now, if we were ever to have something comparable to that, the word would get out. It would be pretty widespread. So I think we'd know days ahead. Not some people would know. Virtually everybody would know.
Those trapped in their cars in 78 didn't have cell phones. 14 died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Communications and forecasting have vast new tools.
I didn't say we're better prepared now.
They're not better now. Even though we have all the technology, I believe that, we have a lot of missing.
Still not an exact science. Getting better. But remember, as we get better, what happens to people's expectations? They grow higher. So even smaller errors, we're still going to get crucified for. You understand? That's part of the job that, that I took here. So that's how it goes.
So you do the best you can. That's what Harvey's doing on this one, like everybody else. And remember, the other key was those cars got in the way. They had then around 2,300 pieces of equipment to clear the roads, but they couldn't move. They were useless. They were sitting there with all the cars. So you can bet if we get to that point, there'll be certain measures put in place to make sure people are off the road. And then now 4,000 pieces of equipment can get out there and get it done. In Newton, Jack Harper, WCVB News Center 5.
And let me plant this seed. Just keep your tablets and your phones charged now. Charge as long as you can, because you might lose power during the storm. And if you do lose power, you can follow us anytime, anywhere. Because during the storm, we'll be streaming live on your mobile device with real-time updates on Twitter, Facebook, and online. Of course, you can send us your storm pictures to ulocal section of WCVB.com.
Return to sender at